Hi guys. So, introduction to this. First, I'm going to tell you something funny. This is my second time to do this entire lecture because I just gave this entire lecture, and at the end, I realized I was not sharing the screen. So, this is Europe Moves into the Muslim Region, Part 2. Just Part 2 for me, not Part 2 for you. So, in the world, in world history, there were three major Muslim empires. The Ottoman Empire, which was in the Balkans, the Middle East, and Egypt. The Safavids in Persia, and the Mughals in India. I'm going to open up a map so I can show you where all those regions are. Sorry, I thought I had it open. Okay, so here's Turkey. This was the heart of the Ottoman Empire. This was the capital. Today, it's known as Istanbul, but hopefully you remember this city used to be called Constantinople. So at the time that we're talking about, this was Constantinople. Turkey owned, kind of imagine, if you could imagine a huge circle, all around here. This is where the Ottoman Empire was. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, all the way up through here. These countries here in southeastern Europe are called the Balkans. It's just like a name of the region. The Balkan region is these countries. Now, along comes our old friend, nationalism. And all these countries in here, the Balkans, they all started rebelling against the Ottomans and wanting independence. Also, in Saudi Arabia, there was a huge movement in Saudi Arabia called the Wahhabi movement. And this was, I don't know, basically the easiest way to say it was an anti-intellectual movement. What that means is they were against modernizing the school system. Right here in Saudi Arabia, there was this huge movement of people that believed that school should only teach Muhammad's teachings. School should only be religious. It should only teach religious texts, religious lessons, no math, no science, no literature, none of that, just religion. And for a little sidebar, this movement is still really, really prevalent, very powerful in Saudi Arabia today. There are a lot of powerful people in Saudi Arabia that believe school should only be religious, and that's it. Now, I had to tell you all of that about the nationalism movements and the uprisings because it was making the Ottoman Empire weak. It was kind of crumbling and falling apart because there was so much fighting going on. The Ottoman Empire did try to modernize. They were trying to make their schools better and make their roads better and put in railroads and industrialize. But that stuff's really, really hard to do when you're also fighting against, like, people inside you or inside the empire are rebelling against you. You're trying to spend all this money on fighting a war, but you're also trying to modernize. Well, this group called the Young Turks. The Young Turks rose up in the 1890s in the Ottoman Empire. And they were a group of progressive reformers. They looked around their empire and they saw everything falling apart. And they said the only way that the Ottoman Empire is going to survive is if we radically change. We have got to push forward with progressive reform. We've got to change fast. They wanted to make everything jump into the future, like now. And they said, that's the only way we're going to survive. There was a huge uprising. They overthrew the Sultan. That's the leader of the Ottoman Empire. And things were going really, really well for them. The Ottoman Empire was strengthening once again, all the way up until 1914. And in 1914, World War I began. And it wasn't a good time for the Ottoman Empire. There was another thing that you need to know about that happened during this time, and it was the Armenian genocide. Armenia was a small region inside the Ottoman Empire that was majority Christian. So this was really weird because the Ottoman Empire was a Muslim empire, and there was this small little region that was majority Christian. So they also, what did they do? Nationalistic rebellion, big uprising. But when they rebelled, it didn't go very well for them. And the Ottomans ended up killing somewhere around 1 million people. 1 million dead. The Ottomans, they sent their soldiers, and some people, they just killed them. Others starved to death. It was a really hard time. And I'm going to show you where Armenia is. Armenia was such a teeny, teeny, tiny little region that when I have the map pulled back like this, you can't even see it. It's a teeny, teeny, tiny little area. I'm going to zoom in now. Right here. Armenia is right here. It is today, it is its own nation. But at this time that I'm talking about, it was not a nation. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. And they were rebelling. They were trying to get their own nation, but they failed. So this teeny, teeny, tiny little bitty area, at least 1 million people died. Okay, when they were trying to rebel and make their own nation. Now, Egypt. Let me go. Here's Egypt, here. And this red dot here, this is the Suez Canal. I want to talk to you guys about how France and Britain really screwed over Egypt. The Suez Canal, this French entrepreneur, I'm going to write his name down for you in just a minute, but a French entrepreneur approached Egypt and said, hey, wouldn't it be really cool if you had a canal that went from here to here? And we learned a long time ago why canals are good. It's easier for shipping. We can get from here to here really quickly. And at this time, hold on, let me go over here and write the guy's name down. He was a French guy, a French entrepreneur named Ferdinand de Lesseps. French entrepreneur Ferdinand de Lesseps. And he approached the leader of Egypt, his name was Muhammad Ali. And not the boxer, just in case you've heard of the famous boxer named Muhammad Ali. This is not that guy. So famous, big Egyptian ruler. And this guy was doing like crazy modernization. He was doing really, really great things for Egypt. He was making everything really, really modernized and doing really well. He had conquered lands. Egypt was on the way to becoming possibly a world leader. Well, when he died, weaker people followed him. And that's when this guy, Ferdinand de Lesseps, came in. And he took advantage of these weak leaders of Egypt. And he said, hey, let's build a canal. And I'll lend you all the money to do it. I'm going to lend you all the money. And you're just going to have to pay me back some interest. So I have to take a break from world history for a second and teach you about interest. It's really important. So I'm going to use small money. Let's say Ferdinand de Lesseps says, I'm going to build the Suez Canal for you for $10. And all you have to do is pay me back over the next 10 weeks. In the next 10 weeks, you have to pay me back. But you have to pay me with interest. So what I want you to do is for the next 10 weeks, oh, sorry, that's not supposed to be 10 weeks. Over the next 10 weeks, I want you to pay me $1.50 each week. $1.50 each week. Now, what does that mean? That means $1.50, $1.50. I know you guys know how to do 150 times 10. I'm writing this out for a point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So well, my dollar signs. Okay, so Ferdinand de Lesseps lent them $10. And they have to pay back $1.50 over the next 10 weeks. So this is $3, $6, $9, $12, $15. He lent them $10, but they had to actually pay him back $15. Just in case, if any of your parents have a credit cards work on interest. The credit card company lends your parents money to buy whatever it is they want to buy, and they have to pay them back more money than the thing actually cost. Interest. So Ferdinand Lesseps said, I'm going to lend you all the money that you need to build the Suez Canal. Well, Egypt couldn't pay it back. They just didn't have enough money to keep up with the interest. They couldn't pay it. And Britain came along, and Britain said, we're going to take over all of those payments for you. We're going to do it for you. But when we do that, we're taking total control of the Suez Canal. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to us now. And when they took control of the Suez Canal, they took control of the region, and suddenly now Britain has great imperial power over Egypt. They were imperially, politically, economically, and culturally. They were now forcing themselves on Egypt. And then in Persia, you had Russia. And let's go back to the map so you can see this. Okay, here's Persia. Russia was up here, and Russia was already in control of a bunch of this land down here. And Russia was trying to push into Iran. And Britain, you know, Britain had just taken control of Egypt. It was, not completely taking control, just in an imperialistic way. They were trying to push east. So the Persian Empire is here, and Britain is trying to push east, and Russia is trying to push south. And then in the early 1900s, oil was discovered in Iran. Oil is really important. And then the Russians started wanting to take more and more control of Iran, and the Brits wanted to take more and more control, and Iran kept finding itself having to give up little bits of its power because Britain was really, really powerful and Russia was really, really powerful, and both of them were trying to force their way into Persia, and Persia kept losing just a little bit of control over their land, and then they would lose a little bit of this to Britain, and they'd lose a little bit of this to Russia, and then they'd lose a little more, and then they'd lose a little more. Imperialism. Some Persians were totally okay with all of this because they were getting modernized, but others didn't want to modernize. They wanted to stick to their old ways and be traditional. All right, now let's go to India and Mughals. So the Mughal Empire had been like forever, centuries, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, the Mughal Empire had been going. In the 1600s, it kind of started to fade away. By the 1800s, a British company called the British East India Company ruled 3/5 of India, and 2/5 of it was still ruled by the Mughals. Now, I want you to make sure and see that this is a company. Do you remember when King Leopold from Belgium bought a region of the Congo, Central Africa, for his own personal self? He personally, it wasn't Belgium, it was him personally. He ran the Congo. That's kind of the same thing that was going on in India. This was just a business. This business was ruling India. All right, and how they did it, how they really took control of so much of India was the land of India was a whole bunch of different cultures, different groups that spoke different languages, and none of them really liked each other. And the British East India Company pit them against each other. Imagine if I went to one of you and trash talked all your classmates and told you horrible, horrible things about them. And then I went to someone else and I trash talked you and everybody else. And I was constantly like just trying to get you all mad at each other. And so when everyone's fighting each other, they're weak and can easily be dominated. So the British East India Company did it that way. That's how they took over India. In 1857, there was a rebellion against Britain and the East India Company. It was called the Sepoy Rebellion. So what had happened was the British East India Company was forcing people from India to join the British Army and fight for Britain. In any war that Britain was in, they were making Indians fight for them. And they did this thing where, I'm looking for something. Yeah, okay. So this is my chapstick cover, or my chapstick. So when they needed to put a cartridge inside a rifle, the soldiers were told to bite the tip of the cartridge off. So they would go like this, bite the tip off, spit it out, and then this is the cartridge that they would put in the rifle. But the cartridges themselves were smoothed down with like fat and grease to make them fly quickly through the rifle. And that fat or grease came from either cows or pigs. Now, India is, at this time, was split between Hindus and Muslims. And I don't know what you know about Hindus, but Hindus think cows are holy. They don't eat cows. So the Hindus didn't want to bite the tip of the cartridge off because it went against their religion. Well, the Muslims, don't do pigs because they're dirty and unclean. So the Muslims didn't want to do it because it might be a cow. And the Hindus didn't want to do it because it might be a cow. The Muslims didn't want to do it because it might be a pig. So they were really angry. And in addition, they didn't really like a whole lot of things that the British East India Company was trying to force on them. British East India Company was heavily being imperialistic on their culture. They were really, really, really trying to get the Indians to act just like them and become very, very British in their ways. Well, this forcing them to be soldiers and telling them to bite the cartridge off that had animal fat on it, it was just the end. They wouldn't do it anymore. And they rebelled. And that was the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857. The soldiers all marched to Delhi, which at that time was the capital of the part of India that the Mughals still controlled. And they went to the Mughal leader and pledged their loyalty to them. They were like, we're tired of these Brits. We want to be part of your empire. But it didn't work out for them because the Brits were stronger and they had better weapons and they had just more prepared soldiers. It was really, really bad. The British conquered them, quelled the rebellion, and they slaughtered, we're talking slaughtered, thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent, unarmed Indians. They burned villages down and they just slaughtered like civilians, people that had nothing to do with the rebellion. And so the rebellion was stopped, and now the British East India Company is in charge again. In 1858, the British government took control of India. It's no longer run by a private company, now the government. The British government takes control of India, and the queen, sends viceroys. A viceroy is a leader that speaks for the queen. Anything that the viceroy says, you're supposed to think of it as this is directly coming from the queen. Now, while Britain was in control, they made schools, and they sent, just like in Africa, they sent the elite children, went back to Britain for school and for education. But how did that work out for them in Africa? Well, it worked out for them the same way in India. These people, these Indian students, were taught that everyone had independence of thought, and they were taught that they were actually taught about nationalism and national pride and self-rule. And so a huge, what do you think the word is that I'm about to say? Nationalism, a huge nationalistic movement rose up in India. And it all happened because the Brits were educating the people. Well, the people were becoming educated enough to realize, hey, wait a minute, they're taking advantage of us. We want our own independent nation. And in 1885, a party called the Indian National Congress was formed. And this was Indian people, Hindus, Muslims, all together. They made this political party, and they wanted independence from Britain. But they wanted to be peaceful. They wanted to have peaceful protests. And they thought that through logic and reasoning and just talking to the British people and hey, what you're doing to us isn't really cool. Can't you just leave and let us rule ourselves? They thought that would work. And so they also supported modernizing. They supported modernizing, and they wanted a peaceful resistance to British rule, and they were hoping that they could talk with the Brits and convince them to let them be free. Well, in 1906, the Muslims started the Muslim League because they didn't like the way the Indian National Congress was being led. They thought that there were too many Hindus and not enough Muslims, and that the Hindus were going to make all the rules and the country was going to be turned into a Hindu country, and they didn't like that. So they started the Muslim League, and the Muslim League wanted the same thing. They wanted independence from Britain. They wanted their own country. Both these parties were going for the same thing. All the Muslims thought that there were too many Hindus in charge of the Indian National Congress. So they broke off and started their own thing. And then they started talking about their own independent Muslim state. Like they started saying, we want free from Britain, but we don't want to be the same country as the Hindus. We want to break free from Britain, but we think Britain should make us two countries. There should be a Hindu country and a Muslim country. And that's it. That's where we stop for now. You guys enjoy.